private London clinic with the Queen earlier. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 2 points at 76.32. The pound buys $1.26 and €1.17. LBC weather, heavy rain at times for parts of England, Wales and the far south of Scotland tonight. Drier but cold in the northwest with lows of -4. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:01 on LBC. It's Monday's Cross Question. I've got a great panel for you tonight. Gina Miller is leader of the True and Fair Party. She's an entrepreneur and transparency campaigner. Sir Alec Shelbrooke, newly benighted Conservative MP for Elmet and Rothwell, former Defence Minister also. Sebastian Payne is director of the Onward think tank. And Kim Johnson is Labour MP for Liverpool Riverside. Well, as you know, they're here to answer your questions rather than mine. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. I might chip in a few as well. You never know. And you can text 84850 or say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And we'd love you to watch us on Global Player as well.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first caller. It's David in Uxbridge. Hi, David. What would you like to ask?
Yeah, hi, Ian, and hi, Pat. My question, Ian, is about what I regard as a double standard. On Friday, the ICJ released a report saying Israel has a case to answer that it could be committing genocidal acts in Gaza. The West takes absolutely no action. A few days later, there's a report about UNRWA workers, about 9 or 12 of them, could have assisted Hamas. Immediate action is taken. What do the panel think about that double standard and how it treats Palestinians and what is really a collective punishment? But it's really about the double standard and what that message gives to the so-called holding up international law and the so-called rules-based system. Does it not just explode the myth that we uphold that, given that double standard? Okay. That's my question.
Just a slight correction, if I may. The allegation wasn't that the UNRWA workers could have helped Hamas, it's that they did. And some of them apparently took part in the 7th of October attacks. Well, let's go to former Defence Minister Alec Shelbrooke first.
Well, I mean, I think the opening point is in all of this is that from what happened on the 7th of October through to now, we are seeing thousands of innocent people die. And I don't think we can ever distract ourselves away from that harsh reality. And I think that the ruling from the court, it was one of those lawyers' rulings which sort of says a bit for everybody. When it said, well, in the long run, we will need to look at whether it's happening, but try and do everything you can not to do it. Well, I mean, I've never heard of anybody not say to people in a war, try not to be looked like there's a genocide taking place. In terms of the funding, I think it's interesting that there's countries on that list who have withdrawn funding that you wouldn't necessarily normally associate to move that quickly on things such as Germany, such as Finland. People look at the UK, they look at the US, maybe even New Zealand, countries like that. I just think it's interesting, the range of countries that have come out. Now,
but again, but I think what David is saying, that in particular is a sledgehammer to crack a nut, in that there were a dozen or so people involved, which, I mean, obviously I think most people would say it's disgusting that they were, but to cut off all funding, particularly when the humanitarian situation is as it is in Gaza, it is possibly overplaying it.
I would agree, actually. Look, I think the humanitarian crisis that is taking place in a war zone, as in any war zone, relies on international independent bodies to be able to bring that relief. Now, the Foreign Secretary has made clear to the Israelis that they've got to do more to allow ease of aid to get in. And so, do I think it's right that all these countries said no more funding. I think in the balance, I probably don't, because you do have to be able to bring humanitarian aid in. Do I understand why they've done it right now against the backdrop of what's happening? Yes, but I hope it's short-lived, and I hope that the negotiations with the UN and however this wants to happen can get sorted out, because clearly somewhere along the line, the bodies that are supposed to be without reproach have broken that level of trust, and that's got to be rebuilt.
Do you think the UN have questions to answer here? Because nobody has taken responsibility. There have been no resignations. And it's not as if UNRWA haven't been criticised over the last, well, not few years, but many years, for their funding of schools, which takes about 80% of their budget, for essentially teaching Palestinian children to hate Jews.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, I think the trouble is in what happens in a lot of these organisations is that you can get into a think bubble and not actually take the step out the outside and say, what does that look like? And then bat off any criticism that comes along. But I do think that now having the light so exposed on this is that the diplomats at the UN representing the countries, our country, the UK, all the other countries on that list, need to be working to address these issues directly and rebuild that faith, because ultimately where we are today is that humanitarian aid will not be getting into innocent civilians in a war zone. And that's not the question about what's going on in the war, how it's happening, etc. All war zones need humanitarian aid, and because of what's gone on, that's not happening.
Kim Johnson, David is accusing the West of effectively hypocrisy here, is he right?
Well, what we've seen played out since the 7th of October is a massive humanitarian crisis, and listeners might be surprised that I agree with Alec in terms of humanitarian aid needs to be getting into Gaza at this moment in time, because we've seen the destruction of hospitals, buildings, people are living on the streets, there's a suggestion of a cholera outbreak. But the only way that the situation will be solved in this situation is if we have a diplomatic response to the issues that we're seeing. Military responses will not see an end to the crisis, and I've called on everybody to look at an immediate ceasefire to end this. You've talked about the people working for UNRWA. 30,000 workers allegedly work for this organisation, delivering a whole range of support to much needed population, and it's alleged that 10 to 14 are alleged to have participated, and I don't know whether that has been independently verified, but if that is the case, it is unacceptable, and we need some immediate action to bring the crisis to an end. 25,000 people, Iain, have died. And we talk about collective punishment. So something desperately needs to happen. But that can only happen when everybody adheres to international humanitarian legislation.
Well, what do you say to the Israeli government on this? Because there are reports that some of the entrance points to Gaza are being effectively picketed by some Israeli citizens to stop aid getting in, which I think most of us would find quite abhorrent. What do you think they should do about that?
Again, I will say what needs to happen is that we need to be adhering to international humanitarian legislation, not getting involved in these type of in terms of these demonstrations outside to stop the aid getting in. Netanyahu has an awful lot to answer for in terms of his civilians. We know that there are settlers who are attacking people in the West Bank. So people need to take account of the actions that are taking place and adhere to these laws that make sure that people don't commit these crimes in a time of war.
Gina Miller.
The tragedy of all of this is almost insurmountable when you look at what's happening on the ground to children. I mean, there's one hospital apparently that's still operating, and even that now might not operate anymore. But If you look at UNRWA, look at the size of it. They are actually about the only organisation that can coordinate the aid that's needed in this area. So to stop funding them is a total overreaction for what's gone on. I think they are saying that they were involved. I think they're saying that it was 10 to 12 people who were involved. And as Kim said, it was an organisation of nearly 30,000 people. There's got to be processes that hold these people to account. There has to be an immediate investigation of how they came to work for the organisation and they were involved in the atrocities of the 7th of October. But to then say that you cut all funding and aid to a peoples who are going through the most horrific tragedy, I mean,
I'm not sure that's exactly
right.
what these countries are saying. I think what they're saying is we are going to cut aid to UNRWA because of this, but we are still going to spend the money with other aid organisations.
But this is a problem because listening to the specialists on the ground and other charity organisations, they're saying that from a capacity point of view, UNRWA needs to be involved because of the fact that they can coordinate with other agencies. So taking them out of the picture does actually have a knock-on effect on the amount of aid that could go in, which is already not enough. I mean, before the war, you had about 500 trucks a day. We're not up to that number at the moment. So there is a deficit of aid that's going in, and this is a crisis that needs I agree, a immediate ceasefire. And I hope all the heads of nations will come together and demand that.
Just before I come to Seb, Kim, a lot of your colleagues agree with you that there should be an immediate ceasefire, but the position of your leader and the Shadow Foreign Secretary is not that, is it? It's that there should be a sustainable ceasefire. I mean, we get into semantics here, but clearly a lot of Labour MPs do not agree with the party leadership on this.
And you're quite right, Ian. It is semantics. And you'd be surprised the number of people who would be supportive of a ceasefire. You know, from my point of view and my personal opinion, you know, I am a backbench MP and I do believe that this is what we need in terms of moving forward. And I think, you know, people in the party are also supportive. You know, and I think the situation is changing. You know, the longer this crisis happens, the more people that will be saying a ceasefire is needed because something needs to happen to bring this crisis to end, to stop, you know, the destruction of Gaza, to stop the killing of women and children. So that needs to happen.
Sebastian.
I want to come back to this point Gina was talking about with UNRWA here, that there's a systemic problem here. There's a problem with the organisation that we saw on October the 7th. One of the most deadly attacks in Israel's history, one of the biggest attacks on Jews since the Holocaust. And you've got an organisation that exists to try and help people in those dire need, aiding that terror attack there. And I don't think you can just brush that away and say
I'm not
that...
brushing it away. I'm saying they have to have investigations and they have to figure out how they got into the organisation.
I agree, but an organisation that allows those people to exist and to actively take part in a terror attack is one that I don't think deserves funding from the West. That the West has got many of its own apparatus for delivering aid. We deliver North.
What about Netanyahu's government being actually not stopping and knowing about the attack that was coming a year before? They were aware that something was happening and they didn't act. That's
not the point we're talking about
well,
here. That's a totally separate point. But we're talking about UNRWA here, about the fact that an organisation has got serious questions, and this is not the first time.
Netanyahu got serious questions.
He has, but I'm not talking about Netanyahu. We're talking about UNRWA.
Organisational failure.
Right, and of course Netanyahu himself is under huge pressure for his own position following what happened October the 7th.
I'm not denying there isn't organisational failure here, but that there has to be a process to be able to... But to cut aid if it then hurts people who are already dying and what's happening and the tragedy that's happening on the ground does not seem proportionate.
But I think when the Western countries who have cut that aid have their own apparatus for delivering aid, as Alec was saying, the fact you've got countries who are not normally in the same sphere as the UK or the US in terms of how it delivers aid, the fact that Germany has changed its view on this shows that they believe there is a structural problem. There is something sick within UNRWA that allowed these people to take part in a terror attack. And I think you've got to act tough and you've got to send a clear message about what happened on October the 7th.
I mean, the interesting thing is that we actually provide comparatively little aid to UNRWA compared to other countries. Only in 2022, 21.2 million. Sweden, much smaller country than us, 61 million. Germany, 202 million. So I wonder if the Foreign Office, or whatever the international aid part of it is called now, has already made a deliberate decision that, well, we're not funding these people because of what I was talking about with the education issues that they have.
And I think there have been longer-term concerns about UNRWA and how it operates, and obviously they're operating in hugely difficult circumstances in Gaza, where she's been controlled by Hamas since 2006 and controls all apparatus of the state there. So I don't think anyone should say that they're having an easy time of it there. But this is not the first time there's been questions about are they delivering aid and what their relationship is with the terrorists who are based in Gaza.
Thank you all very much. Don't go anywhere, because we have a question which mentions the word Donald and Trump in the same sentence. Next, it's 8:15.
LBC.
Let me reintroduce my panel to you. Gina Miller is leader of the True and Fair Party. Now, you're standing against Chris Grayling, is that right? Or was it Dominic Raab?
No.
I can't remember.
Chris Grayling, I'm in Epsom and Newell, standing in Epsom and Newell. Chris Grayling is not standing.
No.
But now
are you going to move somewhere else with a bigger target?
No, they've chosen their candidate last Thursday, and it's not who we thought it was going to be. So, interesting times.
But you're not moving?
I'm not moving.
Okay.
I'm staying in Epsom and Newell.
Alec Shelbrooke, Sir Alec Shelbrooke, is Conservative MP for Elmet and Rothwell. When you got the call about the knighthood, I mean, you're a bit young to be a knight, aren't you?
No, I look young, Ian.
Oh, okay.
Healthy living, allegedly.
But what was your reaction? Because I've always thought that is an honour that does change your life, because we're now supposed to call you Sir Alec as opposed to Alec. But I'm not sure I can quite bring myself to do that in normal conversation.
So it's taking a little bit of getting used to. I mean, look, you just had I think there's so many people who you know, and they're just genuinely pleased for you, and it's a really nice thing. And the word, as you said, is an honour, and it really is an honour. And it also, most of the work I do now is on the international stage, and it's already made a difference in those circles. So, it's actually, in terms of the service that I'm trying to do, representing the country and doing my NATO work, etc., it's actually helping do that job and getting more recognition when I do talk to my international colleagues.
And can it be long before I describe you as Dame Kim Johnson?
I think it might be a while. I think I'm one of the newbies, elected in 2019, and being an MP was not on my bucket list. It was like 6 weeks before the election I became the
that's the best way to do it.
Parliamentary candidate. Well, yeah, it was just like jumping at the deep end. I wasn't a councillor. I wasn't a PPS or not a PPS. I didn't work in a MP's office or do PPE. And
if I'm lucky, I'll have to come and get some lessons from you.
You immediately looked at Seb then, but I don't think he did either.
No, I didn't.
But it's a roof for a lot of people, isn't it? So yeah.
And Sebastian Payne is aspirant MP.
Indeed, yes. Fully focused on Onward and your programme for the moment. Yeah.
Fantastic. Right, well, let's go to another question. It's David in Newark. Hello, David.
Oh, hello, Dale. Hello, mate.
You can call me Ian if you like.
Can I ask a question to you all, please?
Go ahead.
Donald Trump thinks we're on the brink of World War III. I wonder what your thoughts were.
He has said this, and I mean, this is something that is coming up in conversation quite a lot at the moment. The head of the army, Sir Patrick Sanders, called us the pre-war generation last week, which I think took quite a lot of people by surprise, not least the Defence Secretary, number 10. Kim, let's start with you.
Well, was it the defence sector? No, it was the general that talked about developing a citizens' army, didn't he, last week? And when he mentioned that, what I had in my head was that the programme, Dad's Army, and if Donald Trump is talking about, a Third World War, then it must be true, mustn't it? Not, but... we have to be, serious in terms of, there's escalations of war all over at the moment, the Middle East. And I think, again, what we need to be looking at is diplomacy to try and resolve some of these problems. I think, going and attacking bases in Jordan, and looking at the attacks on ships, it's not going to help the situation. It's going to inflame the situation. And I think, what we need to do...
Well, I think that was actually what provoked Donald Trump's reactions. He was speaking after a drone attack on an American military base in Jordan, which killed 3 American soldiers and injured many others. He's blamed what he called Biden's weakness and surrender for putting the world on the brink of World War III. You can't just dismiss that because, he could well be president it would be literally 12 months last week, wouldn't it, when he would be inaugurated for the second time if he wins. Seb Payne, do you and your generation have a fear of a world war in a way that my generation did when there was a nuclear arms race in the 1980s to an extent, but I don't think any of us truly believed it would happen?
So I read an interesting book on this by the economist Noreen Hertz, who talked of Generation K. Now, I'm Generation Y, which is millennials, those younger than me, Generation Z, and she said that they should all be banded together in a Generation K, and K is for Katniss Everdeen, who is the heroine of the Hunger Games. And this book made the argument that the economic and environment that we live in isn't akin to the Hunger Games now. Now, I'm not saying I wholly buy this thesis, but I think my generation, the one below it, can feel across the whole piece, it's the storm clouds do feel like they're gathering, that there are huge economic, environmental challenges as well with climate change, national security challenges, and look at what's happened on geopolitics over the past year. I don't think any of us really saw what was going to happen in Israel, which has then led to this chain of events that's leading to these big apocalyptic predictions. But I'm not sure talking about World War III is that helpful, really, because I think people who follow the news can see things are pretty bad, and people can see that there's a lot of uncertainty and tension here. But when people do talk it up, like the army person you mentioned, Donald Trump, who obviously loves to talk anything up that will help his election chances, but ultimately, I think you've got to deal with these individual issues as you take them. And the point about World War II was a collective sort of the Axis and the Allies looking up against each other. We're not quite anywhere near that situation yet at the moment. But I do agree that my generation, certainly Generation Z below them, have this fear that it is all a bit Hunger Games.
Gina Miller.
That person, as you said, talking it up was actually Sir Patrick Saunders, who was head of the army. So I think I'd listen to him. But it's extremely worrying because if Trump were to win the presidential election, we have relied on the US for our security for centuries, and it's extremely worrying, the noises he's making about withdrawing from Ukraine, supporting Russia, his relationship with North Korea. I think there is a lot to worry about because on the doorstep of Europe, it's our doorstep, and if he withdraws, what does that mean? And it's very worrying because as we now see from reading the statistics that we're decommissioning Navy vessels because we don't have enough people in the Navy. It is very worrying if you read the detail of what Sir Patrick said in that statement that he put out. So the idea of a dad's army, whatever it is, I think we really are in a very, very worrying place geopolitically, because if Trump also decides that his obsession will be with what's going on in China and then removes his eyes and the support that comes from them to Europe and to other nations, then we will be in serious trouble.
Just to play devil's advocate, I mean, if Donald Trump were here now, he would be crowing about the fact that he was the first president for many presidents not to take America into any kind of war and not to take any sort of, drastic military action. I think there were one or two sort of bombing raids in Syria, but that was about it. And he said, well, look, judge me by my record. I didn't take America into war. Obama did, Bush did, Clinton did, George H.W. Bush did, Reagan
did. He did some surprisingly good things. I'm not saying his entire presidency
but we tend to lose...
But it's the relationship with Russia and other countries. I think the fact that he would put, it's not just Trump, though. Biden's finding it very difficult to get his package through Congress. There is an appetite in the US to say, we need to look after our own. We shouldn't spend this money on other wars. So, there is a mood change that's happening across the US.
Alec Shelbrooke.
Well, I think, Gina makes the point, actually, about lots of things that Trump did which may get lost in the whole picture of what Donald Trump comes across as. One thing Donald Trump did do when he was actually president was get countries to increase their funding to NATO. Now, that has gone on for decades, with countries reversing their spending, doing less and less, and America, quite frankly, carrying the bathwater, the baby, the bath, and all the apparatus which goes with it, and we come along with the sponge, and he actually did really get that change, and he never actually made any moves whatsoever to pull America out of NATO. But what Donald Trump does do is make threats, and that's the way he does his business. And he did actually get a positive outcome for what was going on in NATO. I am concerned about what I hear about his ability, whether he'll carry on funding Ukraine. That does concern me. I think the Americans would do well to recognise that there is a war taking place with Russia which is degrading Russia, and there's not a single American boot on the ground. Whereas if Russia does start to win in Ukraine, it will almost certainly move into NATO territory, and that almost certainly means American boots on the ground. And that's something I think needs to be taken into consideration in the West. But look, are we getting close to World War III? It's an apocalyptic description. I think most people think that's nuclear war, that we're going to be living in a nuclear wasteland, that we're all going to be in the trenches, we're going to be calling people up to go and fight. It's a very different world. But however, if there are many, many skirmishes and battles taking place in lots of different parts of the world, then maybe it is a world war just in the 21st century. But it is on our doorstep, and whether it be in the Red Sea, whether it be in Ukraine, it's in the shops, in our communities. It is our war as much as anything else, because it has a direct effect.
But you see, I don't think a younger generation sees it in that way at all. I think we did a phone-in last Thursday, I think, on this, and the callers were split down the middle between those who said, well, of course, if our country was invaded, we would fight to defend it. But I'm not going to fight for Estonia. as if it was a faraway country of which we know nothing.
Yeah, and I genuinely think that is a really important issue. But it's paradoxical in many ways, because the younger generations are supposed to be far more global in their outlook and want closer relationships around the world, and then at the same time say, but I don't want to help anybody, I don't want to get involved. You know, the reality is, and this is the responsibility of politicians to make these cases on programmes like this. It's got nothing to do with journalists, it's got nothing to do with it. It's the responsibility of politicians to paint the picture as to why these conflicts do directly affect you. You know, the cost of living increases are a direct result of the pandemic, then of the war in Ukraine, and you know, now what we are seeing in the Red Sea is not the fact it adds £1 million in transport costs to the freighter, it's the fact that suddenly you've got a 3-week gap in your production supply line.
But the cost of living crisis has nothing to do with Liz Truss.
No, do you know? No, it doesn't. And, you know, Iain and I, we could spend half an hour having this conversation. We had it across the summer of August 22. But, you know, the reality is you came out of a situation of exceptionally cheap money. The Fed have gone up to 5%. Our interest rates have gone there. But it's about the ability, it's the cost of the products which are taking place in the market, such as wheat, grain, but of course fertilisers, and that's often overlooked, and energy, you're quite right.
Just before we go to the news, though, and I genuinely mean this because I don't know the answer that you're going to give. I know the answer that Gina would give, and I know the answer that Kim would give. Trump or Biden? If you're an American, who would you vote for? Alec?
I'll do a writing, because I don't want Biden. He literally what he's doing.
No, you have to vote for one of them.
No, I would not. I would not vote for Donald Trump because of January the 6th. I spent my life working around the world promoting democracy, doing everything I can, and he fundamentally undermined democracy, and he's not fit to stand as a candidate in a democracy.
Seb?
Least worst choice would have to be President Biden as well, because of the threat. And I think the fact is, Alex said, you can't undermine democracy and then not punish someone for that, because it would make a mockery of all the Western liberal values that we stand for. And I think also Ukraine, the fact is Donald Trump is still equivocal on Ukraine, doesn't say he'd fully support it. And if he came in and cut a deal with Vladimir Putin, it would undermine our whole Western order. That would have a big consequence for us. So despite everything, despite the reservations, it would be Biden.
Somebody says you really do need to have a cool Donald Trump phone-in on your show.
Didn't he do that with Nigel? Didn't he phone in to Nigel Farage? It would be bigly, wouldn't it? He phoned in to Nigel Farage.
He did. Yeah, he did. He was on for about an hour, I think.
New York, yeah.
I don't think that's going to. I don't think that's going to happen somehow, but you never know. Right, we'll move on. We've got a Liz Truss-related question next, Alex, so you'll like that one. 8:32 on LBC News headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
A former CIA director has told LBC unrest in the Middle East is clearly spreading following a drone strike on a US military base in Jordan. 3 soldiers were killed and many more were injured in the attack last night. Leicestershire Police has referred itself to the watchdog over assaults allegedly carried out by Valdo Calocane. The reports were made in May last year, weeks before he killed 3 people in Nottingham. And Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has told LBC a decision by the boss of Iceland to support Labour is a sign the Tories are not a pro-worker party, while some Conservatives have told us the defection by Richard Walker indicates a lack of principles. LBC weather: heavy rain for much of England, Wales and the far south of Scotland. Drier but cold in the northwest with an overnight low of -4.
LBC
Gina Miller, Alec, Shelbrooke, Sebastian Payne and Kim Johnson with me answering your questions. Just before we go to the next one, Kim, you've got a private members bill which has its second reading next week in the House of Commons. It's on joint enterprise reform. What does that mean?
And just to say, it's on Friday, this Friday,
this
the 2nd. Friday. Yes, and I'm one of the lucky MPs who were drawn in the private members' bill. So yes, my bill is on joint enterprise. It's called the Significant Contribution Bill. And what it does, it tightens up the 1861 Accessories and Abettors Act. You know, because at the moment, what the law is...
I'm just going to have to ask you to... Your jacket is jangling on the table and it goes straight down the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it's about tightening up the act. You know, there was a similar case in 2016, Joe Gee, where the judges said that the court had taken a wrong turn for 30 years. And so what we're seeing at the moment is lots of innocent people being incarcerated for a crime they didn't commit. And sadly, you know, a lot of those are children who are getting long sentences for crimes they didn't commit. You know, so the bill is very much about ending guilt by association, you know, and looking at, you know, the punishment fitting the crime, and that hasn't been happening at the moment.
It's a brilliant bill, I have to say, because the cost, I mean, this guilt by association. So if you were not the one who perpetrated the crime, but you were there and you were associated, you get to the same sentence or a similar sentence. It's leading to so many people who actually shouldn't be incarcerated, and the cost is astronomical. Everything about it is wrong. So I think Kim is doing a brilliant job on that.
Thanks, Gina.
And what does the government think? Because in the end, with the private members' bills, the government really has to be behind them, doesn't it, for them to become law?
I'm pleased to say that Sir Bob Neal is sponsoring the bill. You know, he's the chair. He's the chair of the Justice Committee, and they did a review, an inquiry a couple of years ago, and then a review, and he is supportive of the bill. It's got cross-party support. It does have its second reading on Friday, so all will remain to be seen on Friday. I hope it does get passed into law. I hope it does reach committee stage, because I think it is really important, because as Gina mentioned, it's the cost to the taxpayer. You know, Manchester Metropolitan University did an assessment on the cost quite recently.
You know, we've got a text on this, so let's do that as the next question. There's no name on this one. We're complaining about the prisons being full, yet we continue to keep joint enterprise prisoners in prison. Doesn't it make sense if you either didn't provide the fatal blow or make a substantial contribution to the victim that you're spared a joint enterprise murder charge? Well, you're going to say yes. Alec, what are you going to say?
Well, I'm sat here listening to this debate, and it's not one I've had my eyes cast over. I'm learning on the spot.
I'm the same. I haven't really given any thought to this before.
So, where I would draw a caution is... Do I want to say this or not? The cases where there have been murders and there have been other people there egging it on, being involved. I don't know what the bill says, and I haven't got the detail Kim's got. But
it's a very short bill.
But does it mean that the people who didn't do the deadly blow don't get a heavier sentence? But what if they're part of the gang who deliberately chased someone down and murdered them? And there have been plenty of examples of that in London recently and over the last 30 years.
Not the same degree. For lesser, and I think the vital point is significant contribution. And, you know, that does happen. Significant contribution. You know, did they assist and encourage? If not, then, you know, they should not be.
I think this is something that the legal profession has been saying for years needed to be corrected. It's not.
I'm an engineer,
it's a short
Gina,
bill.
I'm not.
Seb, have you got a view on this?
No, I think that what Kim says is very, very interesting. And the fact is, I think on sentencing, it is something that I think the government's looking at the moment with the sentencing bill that's going through, and it's something that we've got to take a different approach to, because if you're going to make sure prisons are sustainable in the future, that we do take a more general view when we have got more information about crimes at the moment. So I think it's something that's going to be really interesting as it goes through, and fingers crossed it makes some progress.
Thank you.
Right, text question from Emma in Bristol. Is it, quotes, profoundly unconservative to ban disposable vapes? Now, this was the claim by Liz Truss today about the government's new ban on disposable e-cigarettes. Rishi Sunak hit back at his predecessor, saying there is nothing unconservative about caring about our children's health. Seb?
This has really struck down a kind of fault line of what people see as conservatism, hasn't it? Because for some people, Liz Truss being the notable person, this is about individual freedom and liberty and the state not getting in the way of people having personal choice what to do. Other kinds of conservatives are seeing it more about trying to protect health services, protect the next generation, intervene to do that. So I don't think it's profoundly unconservative. It's just a different kind of conservatism that you're seeing here in this debate. Ultimately, I think the ban is probably the right thing to do here because we've seen evidence that the disposable vapes are highly addictive. They have been targeted in their packaging and their flavours to school children, and the reports about how they're being used are pretty dangerous.
But they're already banned for school children, aren't they?
But they are obviously still being acquired by school children. I think the penalties for them need to be much tougher for that to make sure that they are not being acquired. And with regards to this, you've got to have a balance between what the individual does and what the state does here. And when Rishi Sunak set out his basis about the smoking ban, which I guess is where the root of this came from at last year's Conservative Party conference, I think it's very likely it will become law. And it's the single biggest thing you can do to cut mortality in this country and to ease pressure on the NHS.
Well, is it? Because the health argument goes that, well, that's another point. The argument I've seen from health professionals today is that actually it will encourage people to go back to cigarettes, which are far more lethal and put far more pressure on the NHS.
I think there's a big age disparity in that research there between you talking about school children and talking about older people, because some people have seen vapes as something used to move away from smoking and others have seen it as a separate thing entirely. And for school children, it is vaping for vaping's sake, if that makes sense, that it's about using them for that, but for older people, it may have a different thing. And they're talking about two different tiny things with the Prime Minister's proposed ban. Anybody vape here on the panel?
No. I was a heavy smoker, and I tried vaping for a while and I didn't go there. Now, I haven't had a cigarette since May 22.
You can probably name the day and the time.
Yeah, but I would still tell you I'm a smoker, but I just haven't done it for X amount of time.
But there is a difference between these disposable vapes and the vapes that adults are using, because the disposable ones, I think it's something like 7.7 million a week that are being sold and used in UK, and they're not recyclable, they're not being used again, and the industry is just not taking responsibility. And the flavours that they've got are actually very not just addictive, but they're carcinogenic, because some of them, they have this thing called popcorn lung, which it's something basically where
the acidity,
it's the actual ingredients and things that make it sweet, like cinnamon and butterscotch and stuff. So banning those, because they're even more dangerous than the normal. So there's the ones that adults are using to try and not get back onto cigarettes, and then there's the ones that are children. So something has got to be done. I think the disposable ones are quite different from normal vaping.
And just to add one quick thing, you mentioned about the disposable point, the environmental damage the disposable one is absolutely huge, because they're used, and if you walk along the street, you'll see them in bins and on the pavements, and they're not being recycled. Whereas those I know who use refillable vapes, obviously they last a lot longer.
And I think, it poses a massive public health issue. Again, particularly towards children, because they're easily accessible. There's already been some notable cases in the media, children being hospitalised because of the amount of vapes that they're using at the moment. And
I mean, they're in toilets. I mean, my daughter told me in schools at 11, 12, they're literally, that's all they're doing.
But where are they getting them from?
Well, I think they're easily accessible.
They're easy. I mean, there needs to be stricter regulation. Well,
if they're getting from all of these vaping shops, that sort of
they should be closed down.
Well, exactly. Why are there not bigger? There's another private members bigger penalties for people who sell vapes to kids.
But the way they're marketed, I think Seb alluded to that before, the flavours and the colours, they're very much
being marketed in exactly the same way that Marlboro were marketed in the 1960s, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're glamorous.
Yeah, they're glamorous and fun, and, they're up who can have the most vapes. But
my partner has IQOS. I think they're IQOS, but they're made by Philip Morris.
Oh.
So obviously to counteract the lack of sales from cigarettes now. And every time he lights one of these things up in the car, so you do realise that for the first 2 minutes of you smoking this, it smells as if you farted. And I'm thinking, how can anyone want to smoke these things when that's what they smell like? Because they must taste.
He's not gone into the bubble gum flavour yet.
Clearly not. I know he's not listening, so I can say it. It's 9:15.
This is LBC.
Professor Alec, Shelbrooke, Sebastian Payne and Kim Johnson with us taking your calls and questions. Here's a text question from Jennifer in Worcester. The Iceland supermarket boss has jumped ship from the Conservative Party and said he'll support Labour. The Tories say he wanted to be a candidate for them in a safe seat and has flounced because they wouldn't give him that safe seat. Is it too hard for people who aren't part of a big party establishment to become an MP, Sebastian Payne?
Wonder why you put that one in my direction, Ian. Well, I mean, this fellow seems to have kind of walked into party politics
Richard
quite late.
Walker.
Richard Walker, yeah.
Walking,
exactly. And because I believe his father, who's the founder of Iceland, was a Conservative Party donor, and so there was a Conservative Party background in his situation, and there was talk of him going for Conservative seat, and then he decided to go to the Labour Party and was pictured with Keir Starmer today. I mean, look, as I guess you're alluding to, you know, I left journalism over a year ago now and started with the Onward think tank, and I've applied to be a Conservative candidate, and I've applied for a couple of seats, and you've got to just keep going at it. And I think that my experience has been that, you know, I first joined the Conservative Party when I was 16 years old and knocked on doorsteps with William Hague in Sunderland, which back then was quite the undertaking. The Conservative Party members I've met then and I've met now are open to anyone if you share their values, and I think that's the key thing. So it's not about an establishment, it's about who you are and are you the right fit for them.
It's interesting also that the journalist Paul Waugh, often on this programme, has lost out in his bid to become Labour's candidate for next month's Rochdale by-election. And he says that he won't be going back to his previous career. Plus the panel's, well, it says here, I'm just reading this, Seb, although we've really said what I mean, you've, is it 2 or 3 the races you've gone for? Bromsgrove, West Suffolk, and Selby.
I wasn't aware I went for West Suffolk. I don't know where that came from. I must have forgotten that one.
Corey just put it in for good measure, I think.
That was very, very kind of him.
But do you worry that in the long... I mean, I think you will make it, but if you don't make it, will you feel that it's just been a complete waste of time? And if it will have ruined... Well, I mean, you were on a really star trajectory in journalism, but you decided to give it up for a very honourable reason, because you wanted to be an MP.
Absolutely not. I mean, I've made that decision after thinking about it long and hard, and when the opportunity came to go to Onward and basically move from observing politics to getting stuck in, I knew that if I sat back in 30, 40 years' time and hadn't done that and continued doing reporting journalism, I would have regretted it. And I thought it's not good to go through life without regrets. And I've got my personal motivations based on my background and the ideals and things that I believe in that I wanted to see happen. And I thought, yeah, I could have an easy life. I could stay at the Financial Times. I could come on Iain Dale's programme and talk about politics from a different perspective, but I decided actually this opportunity in front of me, if I don't grasp it fully, then I will regret it. And as I believe all the Kim and Alec will know, politics is never an easy ride. You know that as well, Gina. I was going to say, but ultimately I don't regret it at all. I love the job that I'm doing at the moment. I do hope I can give the general election a crack, and if it doesn't work out, then I won't regret it in the slightest.
Kim, you said earlier on that you, I think it was on air, it may have been off air, I can't remember, but you only became the candidate 6 weeks before the 2019 general election.
That's right.
I mean, had it been in your mind before that, or it just a sort of confluence of circumstances?
It's never been in my mind. It was not something I'd ever considered. I'd been an active trade unionist. I had become active in my CLP, and because the constituency that I now represent is the most diverse in Liverpool, because we have a long-established black community, diverse community in Liverpool, and we've never had a black MP. And so people both within the Labour Party and the trade union movement thought I would be an ideal candidate, you know, being a godly
So as Boris Johnson
woman.
might put it, you were called from the plough.
I was called, you know. And I was on a very steep learning curve for the first, I would say, year or two, because we were elected in 2019 and then we had lockdown. And so it's been, you know, quite an interesting couple of years to contend being a fairly new MP.
And what do you think of people like Richard Walker, who jump from one party to another? I mean, obviously it goes the other way as well, but they're never trusted, are they?
Well, I would say that you have to have a reason to want to get involved in politics. It is challenging, and it's about trust and integrity, and it's about what you want to do, and jumping from party to party, for me, is not great. To be a good politician, you need to be able to deliver for the people within the area that you want to support, and have, their interests ultimately at the forefront, and not just about personal gain.
Gina Miller.
Yeah. I mean, politicians get a bad, reputation from what. No, for doing it for the wrong reasons. I actually think there's a lot of politicians who do it for the right reasons. And when you're passionate about wanting to get involved and wanting to help people and do something and give back, and as Sebastian said, not sit back and regret, I think that's the most powerful thing you can do, is to exercise your civic duty. But you have to believe in something, and you have to. And I don't think you can just put them down one day and pick up another set of beliefs. I mean, that, as you say, it just doesn't build trust. That makes me think you're in it for the wrong reasons rather than the right reasons. Like Kim, I always said I'd never become a politician. I think I've told you that lots of times. But it reaches a point where you feel that you have to do it or else you'll regret it, even though it's incredibly tough and you get so much abuse. Alex was saying before that women who step up get a huge amount of abuse. But you have to try if you really believe with a passion that you want to try and make things better for people. I have a doubt as to what his aims were. So I just don't see how you can jump from one main party to the other so quickly.
Alec?
So I think there's only one real currency in politics, and that's respect. And it's the respect of your peers around you. I respect every single person around this table, even though our politics may vary widely in many areas, and it may be common ground in other areas. But you have to have respect. That is your currency, and you earn that respect with your colleagues, with your peers from across the floor, by being true to what you believe in. And ultimately, for Kim, for myself, for Seb, and for Gina, we all do this and are going into this because we believe in public service. We're not in it for ourselves. The people who go in it for themselves, try and better themselves, will fail. They will fail. It's a hard job. There's a lot of abuse. You're not a rock star, even though you might want to think you are, Matt Hancock. You go in it.
Didn't say that when he was health secretary, did you?
No, it was a lot worse. I couldn't say it. No, but you see, I believe deeply that this is about public service. It goes to the core of me. I am a conservative to my core. Someone said to me the other day, they've never quite been able to pigeonhole me, and I say, good, because there's some things that I'm really quite left-wing on and some things that I'm really quite right-wing on. But I'm a conservative to my core. I'm not going to jump ship. I never have done. I was battling for this party in the mid-90s, and believe me, when you're in your early 20s in the mid-90s, it was damn sight easier to go and follow Cool Britannia than it was to stick with the Conservative Party.
Indeed. I was going to say, on respect, it's about Paul Waugh, who I knew as a friend of mine from the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Again, he had a fantastic, very long journalism career and ended up at the I paper, where he's been a presenter on Radio 4, and he made that big call to run for the Rochdale seat, because he's got values he believes in very strongly. And when you look at the response, even people who didn't agree with Paul's politics, that would be myself included.
I didn't even know what his politics were.
Well, that shows.
I didn't really.
That shows what a great, respected reporter.
I mean, I remember when I worked for David Davis, he was one of our most trusted contacts. Shows what we need, doesn't it?
It wasn't Alan Duncan's.
No comment. Right, let's go to a text from Will in Crediton. I've got to ask for brief answers on this one. Farmers in France have followed those in Germany and the Netherlands in protesting against new EU regulations that will stifle their ability to farm. British farmers are facing financial ruin from disappearing subsidies, disastrous trade deals, and increased pressure from climate activists. How do we stop these protests coming to Britain and convince farmers like me, who are the backbone of the economy, to stick with it? Gina.
I think we
many farmers in your putative constituency?
Yeah, actually, we have a countryside and campaign asking the next government to launch a food and water plan and strategy for the country, because we don't have one and we urgently need one. And that includes supporting farmers who are the custodian of the countryside that we totally undervalue. So we actually are actively working with farmers, and they are suffering, especially the small holdings and the family, 3-4 generation farmers are thinking of packing up because it's so difficult for them to survive. And we do have to have more. We have to support local farming because we need it in a world that's becoming much more volatile, which much more stretched supply chains we have to.
So,
my think tank Onward did a report on this called Greener Pastures, and we said that essentially British farming at the moment needs a serious rethink in the post-Brexit net zero age, because there are too many British farms that have not transitioned to the ELMS, which is the new subsidy structure post-leaving the EU. There are too many farms at the moment that are big carbon emitters, and there needs to be a big push with help from government to really try and make sure we can embrace a different style of farming in our post-Brexit environment.
Alec?
So I think the issue going on the continent is that farms are being forced to do things far more quickly than they can actually cope with. Farms being shut down about their carbon footprint. I mean, if you look at what we've done, and I was part of this being on the energy bill, that we've actually moved back that if you've got a combustion boiler and you're off grid, you have to replace it with heat pumps from 2024, 2026 in rural areas. Well, that actually has a massive impact on farming, and that has been pushed back because, quite frankly, the cost of that and the ability to do that is not properly bedded into the system yet. I always say there can't be anybody who disagrees with getting to a net zero carbon economy, not least for energy security, but it's about how you get there. And if you try and do it too quickly, then you see not only what you're seeing in the continent, but you also see farming suffering in our own country if we try and push them down that road.
Kim?
Well, I don't have any farms in Liverpool,
you
Riverside. Yeah, but I am an avid Archers fan. But what I would say is that farming in our country has been impacted and affected by Brexit. We saw some of the impact on
there are more checks coming in later this year, so there will be a big impact.
Yeah. But I welcome France and Germany taking direct action and raising the issues.
We'll have all the farmers with their tractors around the M25 if we're not careful. Right, our final question. It is from Zach in Watford. If you had to fast for 36 hours, what would you want to eat at the end of that fast? Now, the reason that Zach is asking this is because the Prime Minister has admitted that once a week he fasts for 36 hours. Alec, I'm not sure how often you fast.
Oh, at least between meals. Thick white bread, nice covering of butter, crispy bacon, tomato ketchup, cup of builder's tea.
Kim?
I would have to say it would have to go with our city-renowned bowl of scouse.
Oh, Seb?
A nice medium rare steak with some potatoes and peppercorn sauce.
Oh,
Gina?
Baked beans with Tabasco sauce on brown bread.
Chicken fajitas. Thank you all very much for coming on the programme tonight. On tomorrow's panel, we have Labour's Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornberry, the backbench Tory MP Sir John Hayes, former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng, and the iNewspaper columnist Ian Dunt. So they'll all be joining us tomorrow night for you to ask them your questions. Now, in the next hour, we're going to go back to the first question that we had on Cross Question, because more countries have halted funding to the largest UN agency operating in Gaza as the crisis deepens over the alleged role of some staff in the 7th of